Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Barnyards and Backyards Live. I'm Jeff Edwards, and my co-host today is Jeremiah Vardaman. We are from University of Wyoming Extension. I'm located in Goshen County. Jeremiah is up in the Powell-Cody area. So a little bit of diversity across the state. Our guest today is Nina Wojrowski from Wyoming State Forestry, and we are going to be talking about urban trees and community trees, those types of things. But before we get there, I'd like to remind everybody that if you're using Zoom and you have a comment or a question for us, please use the chat or the Q&A at the bottom and just type your question or comment in there and we'll bring it forward to our speaker. If you're using Facebook today, please use the comment section, and Jenny, who I did not introduce yet, Jenny Thompson is also from EW Extension. She is behind the B&B logo. You may hear her voice, but she will also bring questions forward if folks have them for us. So I think I hit everything. Did I get everything right?
We're good. It's a Friday and the sun's up. Let's do it.
All right. So Nina, we are turning the floor over to you. What would you like to share with us today?
Okay, about myself.
Yeah, sure.
So my name is Nina Wojrowski. I'm the Cooperative Resource Forester over at Wyoming State Forestry Division. And Tara Costanzo and myself, we are located in the Cheyenne office.
Great.
Very good. Thank you.
How many offices do you guys have in the state?
We have 5 district offices, and we have a couple of additional field offices on top of that. If you'd like to see where those are located, you can go to our website under the Contact Us tab, and there's a map on there to see where all of our field offices are located. But all of our state programs are program managers are located in Cheyenne.
Gotcha. Okay. But you guys work throughout the state and have representation throughout the state, though, so people can reach you locally, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Great. Well, what are we talking about today?
All right. The topic of the day are trees and what's in our community and how to diversify.
Great.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
PowerPoint's coming through good.
Okay, great. So to begin, we're going to start with a visualization. I'm going to need everyone to close their eyes and think about a tree.
Don't touch me, Jeff.
Yeah, okay. Stay away.
So as you're thinking about this tree, what does it look like? Does it have broad needles or leaves or needles? Oh, I'm so sorry. Does it have broad leaves or needles? Is the bark smooth or rough to the touch? What color is the bark? What does your nose pick up? Is there a smell? Now let me stop you here. What tree did you come up with?
My tree was the linden tree.
I'm thinking of honey locust.
Ooh.
For whatever reason.
From a smell perspective, I was
Yes, it does have a very nice fragrance in the spring.
Yeah,
I was just thinking of podgall midge because that's what I've been dealing with.
I was thinking about the problems. I was thinking about ponderosa, I think, with the smell. Those smells so good.
We had a person from Zoom saying they were thinking of linden as well.
Oh, wonderful.
Mr. Popular.
So yeah, are there flowers, fruit, or cones on the tree? Does the tree attract bees, birds, or other wildlife? Could it be your favorite tree? And what about it makes it your favorite tree? Is it the shade it provides, the fruit it bears, or just for its beauty?
It's living in Wyoming. That's why it's my favorite tree.
Live is good.
It's alive.
In our urban spaces.
The linden tree I was thinking of was the giant tree in our front yard, and that's where, as a boy, I grew up. And I remember climbing it, and it cast a lot of shade, and we had a tire swing in it, and so it just has a lot of memories that way.
Did you carve your initials in it too, Jeremiah?
I didn't. I wasn't that kind of kid. I was too busy trying to get to the top or fall out of it, you know.
Okay.
I didn't have time for carving.
Sorry, Nina, go ahead.
No, that's great. That leads me into my next question. Where is the tree located? Is it your yard, a park, or other natural area? And lastly, what community is your tree found in?
So my tree would be found in Lead, South Dakota, where I grew up. So my hometown community. Yep.
So rural. I'm going to say rural Wyoming. If I can say rural.
I'm not really associated with a community, just outside of a community then.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, we're moving on.
Can I interject real quick? If your eyes are still closed, you can go ahead and open them up.
Glad none of our hosts fell off.
We did not follow instructions very good.
Very good.
So that was quite a diverse selection of people's favorite trees. So that kind of leads into your topic today.
Great, thank you. So in today's presentation, we will be covering a broad discussion on why tree diversity is important, what tree compositions are found here in Wyoming communities, and how to diversify your property. So when we're talking about diversity, there are quite a few measures of it. We can have everything from species diversity, which is the number of different species in a given location. We can have genetic diversity, which is within that species, all of the genetic pool. And then kind of even larger than that, we can have biodiversity, which is the complexity of the ecosystem and of everything comprising it. And so also, this leads me into talking about ecological resilience, which, as you can see here, there's a bit of diversity in both of these photos shown. The one on the left is taken here in Cheyenne, actually right outside, or right in a riparian corridor, and then and this would contrast with a monoculture of just a single species. And so you can think of a single crop growing, but also we can apply that to a plantation as well, which would be one or very few species of trees grown in an area. And ironically, my opening slide, the aspen grove is also technically a monoculture, but it's found naturally in the landscape.
So why would aspen be a monoculture? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So the aspen is a monoculture because it's actually just one tree that continues to repropagate itself through root sprouts, and so it's one tree with the same genetic diversity in every every individual stem that you see.
So it's a organism, one large organism, even though there's multiple trees, it's all the same organism, correct? And
correct.
So it would also share the same genetic traits as well within those trees, and thus it wouldn't have as much genetic diversity. Is that right? Would that be fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Just like a clone.
So I guess what I hear your point being is that monocultures, we hear sometimes in the media or in certain discussions that monocultures are negative or a bad thing to have, but they are also naturally occurring, though.
Mm-hmm. They are.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Tara, can you think of maybe another naturally occurring monoculture other than aspen?
Just in a lot of our natural forests, a lot of our forests out here, when there's a fire, we do see the aspen repropagating itself. But then eventually, ponderosa will grow up in throughout there. And then once you're getting up higher in elevation, then lodgepole will come up through, and sometimes that ends up being a monoculture. But that's what foresters are there for, and even game and fish, they'll come out and do some forest management and work with the landscape to get out there and do projects to kind of diversify the landscape.
Is it fair to say that trees or groups of trees or a monoculture of trees eventually over time displace others? Does that type of thing happen that so if you mentioned that aspen will come in after a fire, then after a period of time, ponderosas, will the ponderosas displace the aspen trees? And then there's a succession of different trees that occur over time?
Yeah, so that's ecological succession. And it depends on your perspective. Some different management agencies see it as a good thing, some see it as a bad thing, and it just depends on your perspective.
Okay.
Yeah, and what you're managing for, right? I guess
Exactly.
What you're saying, Jeff, and talking about this as a monoculture, the one that I am very evident of here in Wyoming, up here in northwest part of Wyoming, is Russian olive. So our riverbanks are just choked with Russian olive, and they're just a solid monoculture right along that riparian area.
Right.
Acting more as an invasive species in that situation, and really overtaking the natural native vegetation.
Right. Yep.
There.
And man, we can get quite a discussion. There's different people on different sides of the fence on that one, but I mean that is a monoculture as well. So you can find monoculture on a specific area, a specific size of an area that you're looking at. Great. So what else about diversity then?
So in kind of thinking a little bit more about urban tree diversity, we don't just we also kind of expand it a little bit more, and we also are looking at structure. So this really is the physical attribute of the tree, an age class diversity. So anything from a small canopy or a very young tree all the way up to a mature tree with a large canopy, and every combination of that in between. A shade tolerance, which is a range. That's everything from a tree that's requiring shade on up to a tree that's requiring full sunlight, and that's a spectrum too. So that can vary within a species and with all of the trees. So drought tolerance. So we might find a tree that will do well in our climate where we're sometimes not seeing a lot of water, and other trees that are going to be found in a riparian area or a swamp where it's moist consistently or even waterlogged all the time. There are trees that survive and thrive in that environment as well. So that's also a range of tolerance. And height. Most times diverse forests have diverse tree heights as well.
And so, like, especially in our cultivated trees, and we'll probably get to this, when you're talking about those different heights, it's not always the different height of those trees, but maybe different varieties of those trees that have the different heights. So like a dwarf tree versus a mature non-dwarf. variety of that same tree, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
we
wanting
can
to look at that diverse landscape as we can.
And it's also more common in the urban setting too to also see bonsai trees in our landscape also. So
right.
Okay.
And those are all the characteristics that folks should be looking at when we're trying to pick out diverse trees in our communities. Those are the different aspects we should focus on and try and look at within our landscape and know how well our diversity is doing.
Right. Yep, that's something we certainly notice and appreciate. All right. So this next slide is about why diversity is important. And out of all of the reasons, I say human health is the most important reason why diversity is important. So the forests play a vital role in our lives in some obvious and some subtle ways. They're continuously supplying ecosystem services, but to us directly, a beautiful forest is one that's easily enjoyed. It provides the opportunity to recreate, decrease stress, increase psychological benefit, and promote greater health in people. So people who are recovering in the hospital or actually experience faster recovery times when they have a window and a tree to view outside of it, and people take off less time too. There's less sick leave for people who are able to get out and recreate and just to take in greenery in our day-to-day lives is often overlooked. And the trees play such a vital role in adding the texture, the vibrancy, and a sense of place in our lives that it's very important for it's a very important asset to a community are the trees. So I put a couple of examples of diversity in here, or just of why diversity is important also for wildlife, and for our ability to get out, and also pollination services too. The more diverse the landscape is, the trees, all of it, the more diversity we can see in our wildlife and as well.
So especially for Wyoming, like in Laramie, when you look at pictures of when Laramie was first founded, there were no trees except for along riparian areas. So there's such a dramatic difference in the quality of life and what we see around in our communities now that we have trees and they've grown up. But it also makes your job kind of challenging because it makes it a little, you have to work harder to grow trees in places where they aren't naturally perhaps occurring. So. But they sure provide a lot of benefits for our community, as you have pointed out.
Right. Well, and at least the little bit that I know of that research that you're talking about, Nina, is we don't even have to physically get out in those trees, just like what you were saying. Somebody in a hospital bed, if they can just view the green space, right? If they can see some trees from their window, or if you are such as myself, sometimes locked to the wooden cage of an office, but I have access to a window and I can look out temporarily as a break, just as a mental break, to look out at a tree or look out at a green space of a lawn or other vegetation. Man, it makes a huge mental and well-being health, and emotional health there, and that's a big deal. But yeah, Jenny, along what you were saying of the Wyoming, most of Wyoming was void of trees in the settler days in our history, but now we've got some communities that have just some beautiful urban forests that have come in, and we do a good job propagating, but it can be challenging.
Yeah, and especially when Laramie first got treed, they used a lot of cottonwoods. And so now the decades have passed and we're now coming across all these challenges that we are facing due to our lack of diversity. And your great work to help increase that diversity in our communities is very important. And also for folks living outside of town that have windrows that are breaking the wind on their properties and making it a much nicer place to live. Diversity is important there as well, right, Nina?
Right, right. So, so we typically see in, you know, there's a lot of research too behind how and why a diverse forest too is more resistant to pathogens and stress and insect outbreaks, which, as we will get into, we see are often prolific and devastating. So, a lot of things depend on the forest functioning optimally.
Great. So what's next?
All right. So we're still kind of on the topic of why diversity is important, and we're going to start to get into our urban monocultures that have, you know, unfortunately failed us in history and create more work, more challenges, and financial obligations for municipalities. So the three big examples today we're talking about are the American chestnut tree, the American elm, and ash trees. So over on the left is that plantation style forestry of a monoculture, and then there's quite a bit more diversity in the rural landscape on the right. Okay, so the historic American chestnut came to a really near extinction in the early 1900s, with nearly 4 billion trees were lost. These were among the largest, tallest, and fastest growing trees the eastern United States had, and I can speak from experience that they produced really delightfully tasteful chestnuts, and so not just for people but for wildlife too. Is a really abundant food source. So when the chestnut blight accidentally came over from Asia, it took just 50 years for billions of trees to die, and so it was a really devastating fungus that came in and affected the chestnut tree.
That's impressive. So 50 years, and you said 4 billion trees were lost in those 50 years.
This size too, we're looking at 6 or 7 foot diameter trees.
Yeah, massive, big, mature trees just gone almost in a blink of an eye, so to speak.
And their form too is almost perfect too. The wood makes very straight grained wood, and was a very popular tree for all kinds of uses, with furniture and flooring and things like that. So it was not just an ecological loss, but also an economic loss too at the same time.
Wow. Yeah, that's staggering. But the reason for that, you're saying this disease that came in, why did it spread so quickly? How did it take out that many trees?
Well, probably good reason is they were really close to each other. So trees that were close in proximity and just in high density, just the food source for the beetles and the fungus and coming with had an unlimited food source. So all those trees were just, yeah.
And these trees didn't have any resistance to that new disease that was brought over, and it just devastated the entire forest. And there was nothing that, and even today, there's nothing we can do that to try and bring that back. I believe there's efforts to try and bring back the American chestnut. But we're still facing this disease. Right.
And, you know, even today, we can still walk out into the natural forest and find sprouts, because only the top portion of the trees were killed, so the roots stayed alive and just kept resprouting. But they're still at a certain point affected by the blight. But some of the more current research efforts to bring back to restore the American chestnut also kind of include a genetic breeding with about 15/16 genetics of American chestnut and about 1/16 of the resistant Chinese chestnut. And so they're finding relatively good success with the propagation of these and the research and the experimentation of these trees. So resistant to the blight.
So, Nina, is the Chinese chestnut by itself a less desirable tree?
No, it's just not native. So that could be that for that reason alone, it could be less desirable to people. But it's still they still produce really tasty chestnuts also.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, and so while the effects of losing a dominant tree in the landscape like this, this is how we are learning and why all kinds of diversity in species and genetics of the species in the forest are so important and contribute to the greater biodiversity goals that we have.
I think something important to point out here is that if we were to plant the Chinese chestnut, those trees don't have any defenses against any of our native pests. So that could be an issue too. So the reverse of what's happening here with our American chestnut, we don't have any resistance to the Chinese blight. Those Chinese trees don't have any resistance to our pests.
Right. So only an organism can develop that resistance to those disease if they grow up under that disease pressure and in evolution with it.
Mm-hmm.
And our trees have not grown up to the evolution of that fungus, and same for Chinese chestnut has not grown up with our diseases, so they don't have resistance there. Interesting. So what's your next example?
All right, moving on to the iconic American elm. So Dutch elm disease made its way into North America, in Cleveland, Ohio, from France, on logs that came in that were infected. And just like the European elms, American elms had no resistance to the disease. So just within a few decades is when the Dutch elm disease induction really wiped out hundreds of thousands of elms in the United States. And with Dutch elm disease, it's not okay. So it's not the beetle that kills the tree. It's actually the fungus that it transports with it once the beetle finds an elm host tree to colonize. And so that picture on the left is the damage that the beetle in the center will do and the insect galleries, but on those little hairs, which are visible up close, is how the fungal spores come into the tree too. And it's the fungal spores infect the vascular system of the tree, so it's really a shame that there's no defense for the tree once the beetle bores into an elm tree.
So a lot of people might not be familiar with elm disease or this type of loss, but they might be more familiar with mountain pine beetle and blue staining and those types of things here in the West. So it still occurs, just in a different way, right? But it's a different beetle and it's a different fungus that it's affecting the pine trees.
Correct, absolutely. So it's the same. It is the same concept, and the reason I brought this up is because it's just more prominent in our urban settings, and another historic devastation.
Yep.
Well, and
It is a little different too, because it can actually be passed through the root system as well. So
Oh, okay.
it's a bit different from the mountain pine beetle that way. So when elm trees are tested and it's found positive, they also have to trench the ground through the root system to make sure that other trees nearby don't get infected through the root system.
Wow.
So
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
I didn't
That's
know that
interesting.
either. That's incredible.
And the
Yeah.
pine beetle is
How-
native versus this one, which came from somewhere else.
yeah,
Oh, this beetle is not native?
I don't think so.
No,
Okay.
because the beetle and the fungus came over on uninfected logs.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how big is the beetle? Is it
Ooh.
half an inch of grain? They're not very big, correct?
I don't think so.
A lot.
This
of,
is a blown up image of that beetle, so you can see the hairs on it and its body structure.
Well, it
Right.
looks very similar to the mountain pine beetle. I think they're probably in the same family, aren't they?
Yeah,
think so.
probably.
Yeah, and if I'm thinking, I actually had a real photo of my own where I found an insect gallery from an infected elm, and those insect galleries are super small, so you know that the beetle is also
Tiny.
almost microscopic.
Okay.
Something
Right.
so tiny can do so much damage. It's amazing.
But again, the cities and urban development had nothing but American elm trees throughout. And then when this moved in, it was a monoculture of those elm trees, and then there were no trees, right? All the trees had to be removed and destroyed for various reasons, but it wiped out entire forests of this. And you said thousands, I believe, or hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands of trees.
You know, so I mean, that's just devastating. But again, that's where we need to look and focus on diversity.
Right. And it's easy to see too in that center top picture just why it was chosen to line the streets, because it's got a beautiful form, and it overarches, so it makes a lot of shade and is a large tree, so it's it's understandable how common it was before we took diversity into consideration.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. So our next example is our current pest, and this
Correct.
is emerald ash borer. This has really been a hot topic, especially lately, but really for the last couple decades, and this also first detected here in North America as an accidental introduction from Asia, and to date it has killed just about 1 billion ash trees in forest, riparian, and urban settings throughout North America. So and Canada too. And really all species of ash tree are susceptible to the emerald ash borer. There is a range, and so we're seeing the most devastation and in the white and green ashes. They seem to be the most susceptible, and then there are other species of ash which are a little bit less, and maybe not as favorable to the host. So and it's just bringing about a lot of implications that is affecting our city foresters, land managers, and homeowners, that we're expecting the severity to grow, unfortunately.
Right.
So Nina, what species of ash are we seeing in Wyoming communities?
We're seeing a lot of green ash.
Okay.
Yeah, that's green ash and some white ash, but mostly green do really well here.
So this
Okay.
pest isn't in Wyoming yet, but it is a threat, correct?
Correct.
Right. Yeah, and we just to mention we already talked with Tara specifically on the Barnyards Backyard show about emerald ash borer. I can't remember the exact date, but it maybe a month ago or something like that, wasn't it, Tara? And
Yeah.
so yeah, if you want to know more about the emerald ash borer specifically, get on our Barnyards Backyards website and you can watch that recording from that show. But yeah, no, it's definitely a threat, and people need to be aware.
Yeah, and something I forgot to mention during that presentation was that it was actually recently found in northern Fort Collins, so it's only 40 miles away from Wyoming, officially detected. So it's closer than a lot of people think.
And they're finding new reports of it in moving across Nebraska as well.
Yep, it was recently found in Kearney. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So
great, something else to look forward to.
Yeah.
So what can we do about this though? So let's talk about kind of our next steps.
Yeah, so this leads us into promoting diversity, and how we do this is through species richness. So that photo of on the right with two parts to it, we'll use that as an example. So species richness is the number of different species represented in an ecological community, landscape, or region. So we're trying to increase this richness where we can by planting as many different species, but it varies from diversity in that how many species are present, but also how evenly distributed they are across this area. So in this photo, they both have the same species diversity. They have both of those forests have four tree species, but the richness is more evenly distributed in that upper photo, and there's less species richness in the bottom photo, even though their diversity is the same.
So that's a situation you often see in our communities. Is that true in Wyoming, that we may have, you may have a fair amount of diversity, like number of different types of trees, but the amounts of the different types of trees are so low, they're really predominated by a couple of different types of trees. Is that correct? Is that what you see when you do your inventories?
Mm-hmm. And Tara's seen more than anybody here. So.
Yeah, our top species are typically cottonwoods, blue spruces, and ash.
Well, and sometimes you can get into certain situations in the community where you have good diversity, right? And you can have a good balance of those diversity, so it's not lopsided like that bottom photo, but we tend to congregate the same like trees together, right? So they're not evenly distributed and diverse across the landscape, even though we have that good diversity in terms of a tree population and species number.
So many of our trees in Laramie, they're, as you were saying, Jeremiah, they're lined by cottonwoods, big old cottonwoods. And so we just had a spring, or well, more of an early summer storm, and it took a toll on them. They lose a lot of branches. And so it really affects your streetscapes when they all get affected at one time.
Mm-hmm.
What's your other image there on the left-hand side? What are you talking about there?
Sure. So, well, just maybe before we go right to that, another comment is, in general, no more than 10% of the same species in an inventory, and then, I'm sorry. So this is just kind of a rule that is a little bit newer within the last few decades of the urban forest population should consist no more than 10% of the same species or 20% of the same genre of trees. So an easy example to think about would be in a forest of 10,000 trees, no more than 1,000 of those should be bur oaks, and no more than 2,000 of those should be any species of oaks.
Okay.
And that's kind of how we go about increasing our species richness. And So by determining which species are best suited to the local environment, this helps the tree selection process. And whether it's across a large scale, such as the complete urban or natural forest, or the microclimate of your yard, diversity goals are very beneficial. So leading into this picture on the left, the more pockets of connected, diverse ecosystems have compound effects and mutual benefits for each other as well. So and producing more resilience and stability in when we have really great examples of connected and diverse ecosystems.
Right. So we want to have a more uniform landscape instead of just isolated pockets of these, if possible.
And so that's to, just to encourage, probably a lot of the people watching that, while we do care about what's happening on the large scale with, the entire urban forest, or what's happening in rural Wyoming, we also do care a lot about, it adds up too. It adds up when all the neighbors on one street are just taking, this and applying it to their property. So
you can, you're a part of this, right? So it can work on a micro scale of your property all the way up to a full urban forest concept, and looking at that diversity throughout and finding connectivity throughout that diversity within the forest. Great.
All right. So how are we promoting diversity for municipalities? This is done through establishing locally relevant species diversity goals. Our inventories really help us or help our city foresters manage thousands of public trees, parks, street trees, and medians. This allows for greater care for the trees, for individual trees, and it also allows for a database to be collected too, and utilized throughout history, or and then and this just results in greater health of our urban forests.
Now I'm going to stop you right there, Nina. You just mentioned through our inventories. Can you explain those inventories a little bit better, how that process works? And then after we answer that, I have a question from Facebook for you.
Okay, sure. So so an inventory usually for a community is done through a contractor service, and it collects data from the age, the species of the tree, the health, the canopy size, the specific location of the tree. Most trees in the inventories are GPSed, because if you have, so many trees, you got to be able to find it if you're heading to a specific one, let's just say. And also something that kind of becomes important to more on the municipality side is the value and the asset of the trees. So what benefit, how much is the tree worth? What are the energy savings of the tree? How much storm water is it diverting? And all of these things have a value connected to it. So and so that also is a figure, just one figure within the whole inventory, that sometimes is taken and becomes relevant then to city foresters. And
right. So here in Powell, I'm a part of our tree board, the Powell tree board, and we did an inventory, and we used the Wyoming State Forestry grant to help us fund that inventory, and it came came through. And so, it really helps our communities understand what we have out there for the number of trees, the size of trees, conditions those trees are in, but also helps you articulate that back to maybe city officials, right, of the value of those trees. If we lost these trees, how much money are we looking at in terms of replacing those trees and that? And because sometimes for especially parks and recreations in our cities and communities, and even on our personal landscape, that hefty bill to maintain those trees, to prune them properly, and to care for those trees sometimes can be a sticker shock. And so we got to be able to look at the whole picture, and that's what those inventories, at least from my personal perspective, how we used it here in Powell. So they were awesome. Let me jump to this question here before we get too much further. So Jessica asked on Facebook, how do we promote diversity in species when some don't thrive as well as others?
Oh, there's actually a very interesting example of this, and maybe you can tell me if this really does hit and answer the question. But for example, a blazing maple is suited for a hardiness zone of 4 through 8. However, due to unique microclimates, soil types, and elevation, the long-term success of this tree is somewhat restricted in southeast Wyoming, as opposed to areas such as up in Buffalo or more northern areas of the state. Could that be?
Sure.
Does that answer the question? Is that a good example?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to have trees that are going to do better in certain areas of Wyoming than others, right? Here at the end of the show, we're going to have a list of resources of where to identify specific trees that would do well here in Wyoming, and we'll get to that. But for me personally, I've always been amazed at the list of trees and shrubs that do very well here in Wyoming. And so a lot of times our thought is, oh, it's Wyoming. It doesn't grow in Wyoming, right? But actually, we have a fairly good selection of trees and diversity, and we can find that diversity, especially with the resources that you're going to share with us, Nina. Granted, it's probably not the exact same if you come from back east. They definitely can grow a lot more tree diversity than we can because of their moisture regime and some other statements that way. But that's how I would also add on to what you provided, Nina.
And there's also going to be a few cases where, you just have really challenging soils or something, and there may just be one species or two that make it there. But there's larger parts of our state that can handle a lot more diverse ones.
Oh yeah, those are good comments, Jenny. I agree. Those diverse soils of Wyoming can be challenging, but even one or two trees in that area provide some diversity to the overall landscape. So any trees we can grow is a positive.
True.
Right.
What's next?
Absolutely. To finish up this slide, Tara is here also to talk about just a few of our grant opportunities that she facilitates through Wyoming State Forestry for municipalities to help with diversity goals.
Yeah, so each year the Community Forestry Program has a community cost share program. There's two categories. There's the tree planting program and there's the program development. So if communities are interested in having a management plan or a community forestry assessment, which could lead to an inventory being done so that communities know what's in their canopy, so that this could help build capacity, maybe get a budget item on their city budget for hiring a city arborist or a forester or a city parks person to start managing their forest. That's part of our priority forest action plan. Part of our strategic plan is to assist communities build capacity. Our community grants program development grant can assist with funding those types of projects. starting with an inventory is a really good way to start with that kind of a project. Also, for instance, Rooted in Cheyenne is also a program that's there to help with promoting diversity, as well as replacing the over mature trees that are, you know, that does play into the age diversity that Nina was mentioning earlier. A lot of trees in our towns were originally planted during the homestead. The settlers were planting a lot of trees when they were first establishing these communities. So a lot of these trees are over mature, and they probably do need to be removed just for safety and hazard mitigation. So programs like Rooted in Cheyenne, Rooted in Laramie, even up in Powell, you guys started a Homesteader Roots, which is also based off of the Rooted in Cheyenne program. These programs are also eligible for applying for the tree planting grants, also the program development grants. The grants, we have anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 each year available for those grants. Each one of them, we have $3,000 to $10,000 for each application, depending on which program you apply for. There's a cash match or in-kind match component. Volunteers are required. And you can find all this information on the Community Forestry webpage that we have a grants tab that'll tell you all that information. The grants are available usually at the start of October each year, and then the application deadline is usually at the end of February, and then award notices are sent out usually towards the beginning to middle of March. And then all the programs or projects have to be completed by the end of summer, by the end of September. And like I said, all that information can be found on our website. So check out our grants page on our Wyoming State Forestry Community Forestry page.
Yeah, well, and I'll just attest to it. Yeah, up here in Powell, we've taken advantage of those grants, and it's been very beneficial and has really supported and helped our community accomplish certain tasks that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And so, yeah, those are great opportunities. Look into those. What's next, Nina?
All right. So we're looking at now what comprises the urban forest of Wyoming. And these two graphs are both taken from the Cheyenne Public Tree Inventory. So over on the right, that pie graph, we can see the breakdown of just the top 10 species of our urban forest here. So we're a little heavy on the heavier end with the blue spruce, the ponderosa pine, green ash, and cottonwood. However, it's not awful. We still have a lot of diversity, and truly the number of species in Cheyenne's public inventory are, I think there's got to be over 40 species. There's quite a few, but some of them, are just comprising 1% or a percentage of a percent. So this just takes the top 10 species out, and then looking at just the size of trees too, the diversity of we most likely have the youngest trees over in the 0 to 3 inches. All the way on the left, and then over 30 inches in diameter. So that's taking diameter at breast height, and a 30-inch tree is pretty significant.
That's a big tree, and when it comes down, it leaves a big hole in that landscape. We've had that up here in Powell, and talking to what Tara was saying, we have that same. That's what our community is facing up here in Powell is we have a lot of trees that are 60, 70, 80 years old that were planted at the founding of the town. And those trees are those big 24 to 30 inch or greater than 30-inch trees. And when we're doing street projects and things like that, those trees are coming down, and those are those are big holes that are felt within the community landscape, and then trying to bring a tree back in. It's not always going to be the same, but that's an interesting graph there of how that distribution is.
I actually plan to mention a little bit about the Powell community too. How just in the last 15 years, their diversity has increased also with the number of species going from 42 all the way up to 53 now. And the number one tree in Powell, which is the ash, and in 2003, Powell had 39% ash in its canopy, and as of 2018, the numbers decreased a little bit down to 28%. So also species richness is also increasing too, is what we can derive from those numbers.
Right, which is a good thing, because if emerald ash borer, or when emerald ash borer gets here to Powell, I mean, if it hit us today, we lose a third of our canopy. We lose a third of our trees. That's a significant loss for our community. And so if we can bring that number down and bring some more diversity to that, like you're talking about, man, we won't feel it near as bad. It's not saying that we won't lose any trees, but we just won't feel it in our landscape near as detrimental.
And just the workload too for city forestry is, or any participating tree care companies that the city might have to contract out because it's just too much work. So
right. If that 30% of trees all have to come down within a 3-year window, that's a lot of trees to deal with. Yeah, great.
And hazards too if they're dead at that point. So it could be, it turns into a liability also. And so just summing up, urban forests in Wyoming too. We have 36 of our communities which are recognized as Tree City USA, awarded by the Arbor Day Foundation. So, and that just and those guidelines that award the community as a Tree City USA help them concentrate on these diversity goals, and in the species richness, the diversity, and the crown class too, the maturity of the trees. So it all combines.
Great. What's next?
All right. So how to diversify your property or yard?
That leads to a question that we had come in on Facebook. Excuse me, I mispronounced your name. Galandria asks, what resources do you have to assist or educate landowners in rural areas? So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that after you talk about how to diversify your yard or property.
Sure. So some ways to diversify your property. So as you can see here, choosing a variety of shade or flowering or fruit trees are all going to give you a very different effect on your property too. So going back to the linden, let's say the tree you were thinking of, there are different flowering times of trees, which if you are buying a flowering tree to add to your property, you could consider the timing of different flowering trees, because they're all slightly different. And this is really an area that Tara knows a little bit more, but also choosing a variety of sizes, choosing trees that are just 10 or 15 feet tall at maturity, or on up to 80 feet tall. There's a lot there to consider, and so, for example, you really would not want to place a small shade, or no, a small sun-loving tree under the shade of a large tree.
Right. And so you were really going to get back to those characteristics that you talked about before at the beginning of our presentation. Right. You want to look at those different characteristics and provide that diversity within the landscape. So we want different sizes of trees, different types of trees, flowering trees, and all the way down to small bushes. So we want some of that understory effect. And depending on how big your landscape is and the purpose of those trees is going to really dictate how you go about deciding what you want on your property.
Mm-hmm.
So you have some resources that help folks pick out the different, especially as far as picking out different types of trees. So the individual that was asking about, how do we pick out different types of tree for an area to diversify when we have such challenging conditions? But you guys have some resources that are pretty handy for that. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. And if you happen to be a little bit more familiar with trees or do your own research also, maybe someone is after a particular characteristic of the bark of the tree, or there are some, more of these, more variety, a lot of variety also just in the aesthetics of the tree that a nursery could really help you provide, or could help provide you. And so, kind of things to consider when buying a tree at a nursery. These are, we have a maple tree on the right and a spruce tree on the left. And these both, the contrast of both of these photos are examples of different cultivars of a tree. So on the far left is the Colorado spruce, and then the blue spruce next to it are that genetic for the enhanced blue color was reproduced when found in nature. And so that leads us to a specific cultivar of a tree. And then the example of the maples on the right, the top one is a Norway maple, and then a cultivated variety of another maple is the Tartarian hot wings variety of a maple also.
You can just find different diversity, genetic diversity within those same species, which are known as cultivars, correct?
Right, and just, I mean, these trees are, to me, very beautiful. So, just these physical, these visible and physical attributes are oftentimes why people select a certain tree over something else. And so, and just kind of touching back on genetic diversity, if you are buying trees from a nursery, there are a couple ways that trees are reproduced, and one of them is through seed propagated trees. So if you're buying, let's say you're making a windbreak and you need 200 trees for your windbreak. Well, it would be slightly better for you to go with more genetic diversity within your that one species of however many trees, which you would get from a seed propagated tree, because each seed is genetically different from the next seed. And so sometimes with very specific cultivars that we find at the nursery, in contrast to this, for those genetic traits that we are so after, like in the maple species or that Colorado blue spruce, there's less genetic diversity because the breeding is done through propagation, and the genetics are isolated to reproduce for that specific trait. So
So on practical scale, for folks that are buying trees, say for a windbreak out in a rural area, and they're buying conservation little seedlings from their local conservation district or other folks that sell them, those tend to be grown from seed. So you're naturally getting that shuffling of genes that occurs in nature that occurs in those ones. So when you're planting your windbreak, perhaps that's a better choice than going to a nursery and loving a certain cultivar that's called Blue Wonder or something that's going to be basically identical. It's going to be like having a bunch of different clones in your windbreak. And so when a disease or an insect comes along, if one's susceptible, they're all susceptible. So they're all going to go down at once, which can be very heartbreaking when you put so much work in growing your windbreak.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. That was a really wonderful way of putting it. Very, very clear. Thank you. Okay, so just a few more things to, reiterate what's kind of important and what to consider about your property and your trees. To think about, what size tree and what sizes are you looking to put on your property, or what can your property support, really? Looking at flowering versus fruiting trees, and considering the fall foliage color too is a really, something also that really sticks out, to have unique colors too, which buildings and the landscape don't really do that for us nearly as much as trees do. So to really consider your light requirements too. So whether or not your tree's needing that range of full sunlight or partial sunlight or shade, and the functionality of your tree too. Consider if you're buying trees for a privacy screen or a windbreak, or if you live somewhere in a loud area, trees could really be that nice sound buffer for you. Or even a living snow fence to reduce wind, or to reduce snow drifts in the winter. Or you could just be looking for just one nice shade tree on the south side or the west side of your property, and just a variety of other conservation purposes. And then last but not least, to consider your location. So relative to utility wires above ground and below ground, the foundation of the house and the septic system, and are also things to keep in mind. And how close you are to the neighbors. If you don't have a very big property and you plant a tree close, that overarches into your neighbor's yard too, that still is legally your responsibility, because it's your tree to prune and to take care of also.
Right. So Nina, yeah. what you're really trying to tell us, I think, is that if you're a landowner or property owner, start with a plan, kind of do your research, try to figure out what trees you like, where it would fit best, and then try not to plant all the same type of tree, and have diverse plantings of trees on your own property.
Right.
Okay.
And then probably the last thing we always say in extension is the right tree in the right place. So like what you're saying, not near the utilities, not your power lines, close enough or far enough distance away from septic systems where the tree's not going to cause damage or property damage, essentially. So excellent. What's next?
All right. And the next slide is going to be all of our resources too. And these, the resources too, these are all, these should all be found on the Wyoming State Forestry's division's homepage. But I believe, Jenny, we can post them in the comments too, correct?
Yeah, when we post up the
for
recording
easy
of
access.
this. Yeah, when we post up the recording of this video, we'll have links to these that go along with them. And almost all of these are also up on our Barnyards and Backyards webpage, which I'll show at the end, which has, it's called landscaping, but includes a lot of information, great information from Wyoming State Forestry on trees, on how to choose them and how to help them grow.
In today's presentation, we broadly covered a discussion on why tree diversity is important, what tree compositions are found in Wyoming communities, how to diversify your property, and thank you so much for attending the show.
So I'm going to share my screen out and we'll take a look at a couple of those publications, which would be awesome. So I pulled a couple of them up. You have your Tree Owner Manual,
yep,
which is an awesome resource that helps folks. It gives a, do you want to describe the types of information that's in there?
Sure. So it yeah, it goes through on how to just a lot.
Yeah, you got a little bit of everything in there.
It's a very comprehensive guide for homeowners that are interested in planting trees, selecting trees, how to prune for structure on young trees, how to mulch, how to protect your tree from critters, so putting up fencing for deer resistance, etc. It's a really great resource. I also wanted to just point out that while we do have these digitally available on our website and on lots of other websites, we do have them in print and at all of our field offices, in a lot of the extension offices, a lot of conservation districts have them. So they're widely available in print if you're not, if you don't like looking at things on a screen and you'd like to have a physical copy. If it's not locally available, get in touch with us. We can mail you a copy as well. Also, these were all produced before the emerald ash borer was really of major concern. So the tree lists in there, the first 3 trees on both of these are ash trees as recommended trees. So just disregard that as recommended trees.
Draw a big black line through all of those.
Yeah.
But you have a lot, so folks were asking where they can find information about the different types of trees they can choose from. So here's an awesome list that's available from Wyoming State Forestry on the different types of trees that you can choose from. There are also,
I really like that resource, man. It's got a good list in there and good information on specific trees for you to look into.
Very nice. And then we also have some from Extension that you could look at as well, especially if you're looking for landscape type trees. So they have some information in here and also some lists talking about different types of evergreen trees and giving a little information about those kinds. So those are really useful resources. And you can find them if you go onto the Wyoming State Forestry page. So this is their educational technical resources. You can find links to both those if you want to see it online and some other cool stuff that they have. Also on our Barnyards and Backyards page, if you go to landscaping, we have a ton of information from the Wyoming State Forestry and others on choosing types of trees. So there's a bunch of Barnyards and Backyards articles. There's those landscape publications I was talking about. There's the State Forestry publication right there. So there's a ton of information on choosing and taking care of your trees and helping them thrive.
Yeah, and those extension ones look like they have a little bit more information about the size of trees, so that's really great reference for sure. Ours just has climate zones, hardiness zones on it.
That's important in Wyoming.
It is.
Well, thank you so much, Nina, for that presentation. Thank you for joining us and sharing all that great information with us. It definitely have a treasure trove of information now for people to understand their urban forest a little bit better and how to diversify. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I've got one slide left that just shows Tara and my contact info. So if anybody would like to reach out directly to us or have questions, comments, anything, we appreciate it. So
they can also find you online if they Google Wyoming State Forestry Division Community Forestry. That's where they can find you.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Great. Well, and with that, thank you, everybody, all our participants out there on Facebook and here on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and energy. This is why we do it. We're doing it for you. And so with that, Jenny already highlighted that Barnyards and Backyards website. Go on there. If you want to see past shows, we have them recorded just like this one. We'll post this one up as soon as we can. Get on there. You can view past shows. You can see the schedule for future shows. We also have that treasure trove of information. With these shows, as we record them, we put up the links that are mentioned in there. So it's a one-stop shop for you. So we're trying to help you out there. Reach out to Nina and Tara down there at the State Forestry Office or any of your local offices that are out here. Also, our extension offices, we have an office in every county and one on the Wind River Indian Reservation, and they would also help you be able to link to these resources or get in contact with Tara and Nina. The last thing we want to share with you, I believe Jenny's already done it. If she hasn't beat me to it, is the evaluation. So we need feedback from you for these shows. We'd really appreciate it for you to take your time. She'll throw a link into the comment section there on Facebook or in the chat box here on Zoom. And then for those that are joining Zoom, if once you close out of this, you'll be prompted in an internet browser for an evaluation. It's a 5-question easy evaluation. It just provides us feedback so we can better serve you and gear these Barnyards and Backyards live shows specifically for you to try and help you out there. But with that, Jeff, I think we're done. Jenny, thank you so much for a great show again. Nina and Tara, thank you so much for joining us. It is, you guys have a great Friday and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you much.
Thank you.